and count its many tears, while we all sob sorrow with the poor. There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more. Here's a song, a sigh of the weary. Hard times, come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times, come again no more. We seek mirth and beauty, and music light and gay. There are frail forms fainting at the door. Though their voices are silent, their pleading looks will say, oh, hard times come again no more. It's a song, a sigh of the weary.
Represented here today are members of the 43rd North Carolina Company B Union Farmers, raised from Mecklenburg and Union County in January 1862. Mustered in at Camp Magnum, Raleigh, April 12, 1862, the regiment started with 1,066 officers and men. On April 19, 1864, surrendered 9 officers and 106 men. Represented here today is the 30th North Carolina Company K that was raised from Mecklenburg County. September 26, 1861, the regiment mustered 2,264 men, and Appomattox has surrendered 158. Represented here today is Latham's Artillery that was formed in January of 1862 in Newbern, North Carolina, under the name of Branch Artillery. At one point in the war, the battery was almost completely decimated and was rebuilt drawing from North Carolina infantry troops. None of them reached Appomattox, the original men. Captain Flanner of Latham's Battery brought the unit flag home to Wilmington, hidden in his coat. Resides in the Cape Fear Museum today. North Carolina provided more men to the Confederate cause than any other state, approximately 133,905 soldiers. North Carolina Confederate troops suffered heavily during the war. 40,000 died during the war due to battle injuries or disease. North Carolina provided 17 brigadier generals and 7 other generals of various ranks to the Confederacy. Names familiar to us: Grimes, Gordon, Daniel, Armstead, Ramsar, Hoke, D.H. Hill, to name a few. Today, what should be foremost in our minds and recognized is the average infantryman, cavalryman, artilleryman, and Navy man that endured great hardship while undersupplied, undermanned, and withstood and held back many times and defeated a superior supplied and outnumbered force the majority of the war. Many of these men also, with unsurpassed endurance, loyalty, and courage, stacked their arms and surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. Just 4 weeks ago was the 150th anniversary of Appomattox, the end of the 150th series of anniversaries and events, a milestone for many of our reenacting friends. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us this morning with a heavy heart as we reflect on the ending of the war and what each soldier must have felt like the morning of May 9, 1862. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. We are gathered here today to recognize veterans of all wars, but especially the veterans of the war between the states. If you are a veteran, would you please stand so that you can be recognized? Thank each of you for your service. 2015 marks the end of the 5-year National Sesquicentennial celebration of the war. And in recognition of the Sesquicentennial, we have a very special program planned for you today. Thank you, Brian O'Neill and Latham's Battery, for that moving reenactment of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. Later, we will unveil the monument that is the new home for the Confederate Navy Yard Shield, which you will hear more about in a few moments. We would like to welcome all of you to this memorial service and to the dedication of this monument. We hope that you will enjoy the program. Now I'd like to call on Mrs. Joy Cooper, who will lead us in an invocation.
Please rise if you're able. O Lord, our God and Father, from the Minutemen and militia at the beginning of our great nation to the servicemen and women of today, we give you thanks, O Lord. The words we have that is due our armed forces are so inadequate. All we can say is a heartfelt thank you, O Lord, for their courage and bravery that caused many battles. We thank you for the price they were willing to pay for our freedom. We ask your blessings on this memorial service and on all who are here today. Amen.
Mrs. Rich Kane will lead us in our pledges, and you will find those on the back of your program.
You're not going to sit down much anyway. I heard it.
First, we're going to take the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now salute to the flag of North Carolina.
To the flag of North Carolina, and pledge to the United States, one loyalty and faith.
And then salute to the Confederate flag.
Salute the Confederate flag with affection, reverence, and undying relation to the cause which calls for us.
Thank you, Mrs. Cooper, and thank you, Mrs. Kane. We'll now have Mr. Johnny Biggers do another piece of music for us, Dixie.
Seeing that we're all pretty much from the South, we all pretty much know this song. We've heard this song. We've sang this song with lots of fun and a reverie. And when I was looking it up, I noticed there was a number of verses to this song. Everybody knows the first one and everybody knows the chorus, but how many know the other choruses and the story behind the song? Those other verses, as I read them out, was a tragedy between two lovers. And as I was looking over it, it kind of seemed sort of relevant to what is actually going on here. The North and the South, they were of one body. They were in a relationship, and that relationship fell on hard times. and they fell out of love with each other. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to do Dixie, and I'm just going to do the one that everybody knows and a follow-up first. And I want to hear a rousing chorus from all of you. Whether you think you can sing or not, I know you can project volume, and there's blessings in multitudes when it comes to singing.
Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, Dixieland. In Dixieland where I was born, early on one frosty morning. Look away, Dixieland. Everybody, I wish I was in Dixie. Away, in Dixieland I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away down south in Dixie. Away down south in Dixie. Now here's to the health of the next old missus, all the girls that wanna kiss us. Look away, Dixieland. And if you want to drive away sorrow, come and hear our song tomorrow. Look away, Dixieland. I wish I was in Dixie. Away, in Dixieland I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away down south in Dixie. Away down south in Dixie.
We're thinking glory days. Yeah.
Mrs. Sue Ellen Delahunty will lead us in the memorial to the Confederate veterans.
May we always be proud to honor and remember the Confederate veterans who stood so bravely to defend their homeland. Today we honor their memory, we honor their courage, and we honor their dedication to the cause that they so believed in. We are proud to be their descendants, and we pledge to honor and remember those brave men through all the days of our lives. Let us always act in a manner which will reflect honor upon our noble and patriotic ancestors.
Thank you, Sue Ellen. Mr. Dennis Harris, U.S. Navy retired, will lead us in the memorial to all veterans of all wars.
Thank you, Beth. My name is Dennis Harris, and unlike most of you here, I did not grow up in Charlotte or North Carolina, and in fact, I have no ancestors who served during the war between the states. But I have been asked to speak on a more general issue. Today's events, as you know, are specific to the war between the states and the events that occurred during those years. But as we attend, I think we often reflect on perhaps our own individual background or that of our family members. And as you heard from the previous speaker, we're here to give honor to them. I think it's important for us to remember that throughout the wars of our country, and as they continue to exist today, we do have veterans who have suffered great personal losses. You see things on television, the newspaper, and the media about men returning from Iraq and Afghanistan without a limb, maybe two limbs, and so forth. I think it's important to remember not only do we have the combatants who bear the burden of defending our country, but also their spouses, their mothers, their sisters, and their family members, the boys and girls. And as we focus today, let's not forget that we have others than those who specifically wore the uniform that also bore the burden of freedom in our country. If you're in a heritage group, I encourage you and applaud you for what you do to bring all those events to us. Today, again, we're focused on a specific period, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy are to be applauded for bringing that to us. And for Beth Zeiss specifically, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. I mentioned that Dennis is U.S. Navy retired. He's also U.S. Airways retired. And more importantly than that, he is the father-in-law of my son. Okay. Mr. Johnny Biggers is going to come back now and sing for us the Bonnie Blue Flag.
A band of brothers and native to the soil, fighting for our liberty with treasure, blood, and toil. And when our rights are threatened, the cries roll near and far. Hurrah for the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah, for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. As long as the Union was faithful to her trust, like friends and like brethren, kind we were and just. But now when northern treachery attempts our rights to bar, we hoist on high the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah, for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. First gal in South Carolina nobly took the stand. Then came Alabama and took her by the hand. Next quickly Mississippi, Georgia, and Florida all raised on high the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah, for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. Men of valor gather around the banner right. Texas and Louisiana join us in the fight. Davis, our beloved president, Stephen, statesmen are. Now gather round the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah, for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. Hurrah, hurrah, for Southern rights, hurrah. Hurrah for the bonnie blue flag that bears a single star. Thank you. Stonewall Jackson 220 has many friends. Some of them you have already met today. One, Major Doug Wright, who took care of the posting of the colors for us. Private Brian O'Neill of Latham's Battery, who did that wonderful reenactment along with Latham's Battery on the surrender at Appomattox. We have Mr. John Ellis, who every year brings his beautiful flags and displays them very prominently for us when we do this memorial service. And the fourth friend that you're going to meet is Larry Walker. Larry has done so much through the years for UDC, along with these other three gentlemen, that I can't even begin to tell you. But Larry is going to talk to us a little bit about the Navy Yard Shield and the Confederate Navy Yard in Charlotte. Larry?
Thank you, Beth. Most of what I'll be talking about today comes almost verbatim from an article published in the late 1950s by a gentleman who lived in Charlotte. His name was Mr. Ralph Donnelly. And Mr. Donnelly was a member of the Company of Military Historians, very much a student of the war. And he also wrote a very detailed study, an excellent study called the Confederate States Marine Corps, the Rebel Leathernecks. So most of what I'm going to say comes directly from Mr. Donnelly's article that he wrote in the late 50s on the Confederate Navy Yard here in Charlotte. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
The story of the Charlotte Navy Yard begins the first year of the war at Portsmouth, Virginia. at the former U.S. Navy Yard known as Gosport. This yard, sometimes referred to as the Norfolk Yard, was a center of naval construction, and it was here gun carriages were made for the heavy naval guns shipped throughout the Confederacy for hastily constructed defensive works in the early days of 1861. Here, much of the shot and shell for the guns was also prepared. A new laboratory cast iron and brass cannon, manufactured fuses, caps, bullets, shot, and shrapnel. The yard also contained a manufacturing machine shop. One deficiency early on in the war was in the construction of heavy steam engines that were vitally needed for the Confederate ironclads, and that was partly corrected with the purchase of a steam hammer called a Naismith steam hammer in the summer of 1861, probably purchased from the famous Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond. The spring of 1862, it became apparent the Confederacy stood a good chance of losing the Norfolk and Portsmouth area, and with it, Gosport Navy Yard. As Federal forces in large numbers moved down on Tidewater, Virginia, under General George B. McClellan, the well-known Peninsular Campaign of spring and early summer 1862 would soon follow. Anticipating the loss of the Gosport Navy Yard, orders were sent to Captain Sidney Smith Lee of the Confederate Navy, who also was brother of General Robert E. Lee, instructing him to begin packing and readying for transportation machinery and tools not required for current operation in the workshops. Fast-moving events and fast-moving Yankee troops brought about detailed instructions on May 3 for withdrawing from Gosport Yard. Secretary Stephen R. Mallory directed Captain Richard Page to select a safe place in North Carolina for a laboratory and transport ordnance stores, ammunition, arms, somewhere down here in North Carolina. Naval storekeeper William Peters was instructed to remove his stores to North Carolina, beginning with the most valuable provisions and clothing. Such valuable machinery as could be saved was sent to Richmond, while much of it began to move south by rail into our state here in North Carolina. Anticipating evacuation of Norfolk, the Navy Department assigned Captain William Murdahl and William H. Parker to look for a site to which equipment of the Gosport Yard could be moved. Their choice was Charlotte, well situated in the interior, some 200 miles from the coast, but also well connected by rail to the seaboard. In Charlotte, Captains Murdahl and Parker met an old shipmate, Captain John Wilkes, formerly of the U.S. Navy, who showed them property he had recently acquired, which he thought would be suitable for a Navy Yard. The property was inspected, approved, and purchased by the Confederate government. Steps were taken at once to establish the Navy Yard. A number of machines, including lathes, planers, tools, and a small steam hammer, were hurriedly shipped down here in May of '62. First commanding officer was Captain Samuel Barron. He was detached and sent elsewhere in the fall of '62. Captain Richard L. Page of the Confederate Navy, later general in the Confederate Army, who was in command of Fort Morgan at Mobile Bay, was placed in command of the newly created Ordnance Works. That was the official title for the large operation here. There were Naval Ordnance Works. He made his headquarters and home at the former U.S. Mint on West Trade Street. On the yard property itself, a number of large frame structures were erected to house the various shops, including a gun carriage construction shop, a large forge shop where the largest steam hammer in the South and pride of the yard was erected. The yard also included numerous material and coke ovens and a foundry. The property was very large in operation, spanning a length the size of 3 football fields by today's standards and the width of a full city block. The yard property was bounded by tracks of what was then the North Carolina Central Railroad and tracks of the South Carolina Railroad. A wooden landing stage or platform was built from the yard to the railroad for convenience loading and unloading. For many years after, that platform was known in the old days of Charlotte as the Navy Yard Wharf. By July of '62, a hoisting crane was in operation. A month later, another steam hammer, this one saved from the Navy Yard at Pensacola, Florida, was being erected at Charlotte and promised relief in the matter of heavy forgings. Many of the mechanics who were at Gosport came down here. Some stayed up in the Richmond area. Some from Washington, D.C. came down here who had worked at Gosport, and some were local workmen recruited from Charlotte. Following Captain Page was an officer named Captain George Hollins. He served a short time here. He was later replaced by Lieutenant Catesby Ap R. Jones. By the way, Ap, for some of you who don't know, Catesby Ap is Welsh for son of. Sue Ellen had asked me a question about that the other day, and it's an acronym just like the Irish for O'Brien or O'Neill is an acronym for son of, or in Scottish, McGillicuddy, McEwen, McClure, that is also an acronym for son of. Lieutenant Jones had commanded the famous Virginia in the duel with the ironclad Monitor in Hampton Roads in March of 1862 after the wounding of Admiral Franklin Buchanan. A few months later, Jones was ordered to the large ordnance works at Selma, Alabama that were being developed down there. This change left for most of the war, it seems that for most of the time, at least the latter year and a half or so of the war, Chief Engineer H. Ashton Ramsey, who had also worked on the ironclad Virginia in converting the steamer Merrimack to an ironclad, he became commanding officer here, H. Ashton Ramsey. Naval officers connected with the Charlotte Yard were all highly educated and cultured men. Their families were warmly welcomed in Charlotte. A directory from the Charlotte Daily Bulletin in July of 1863 gives this list of officers on duty at that time. Commandant of the Naval Station, Catesby Ap R. Jones, office at the Navy Yard, south side of Trade Street. Acting Executive Officer and Gunner, John Owens, office at the Navy Yard. Paymaster John Johnson, office at Confederate States Mint. Surgeon Charles Williamson, office at Naval Store, south side of Trine Street. Chief Engineer H. Ashton Ramsey, office at the Navy Yard. Naval Storekeeper William Peters, store on the south side of Trine Street. By the close of 1863, the Charlotte Navy Yard had developed to a considerable extent. Improved facilities for the construction of marine engines to go on the vessels and other heavy supplies had been made by extending and strengthening buildings in which equipment was housed and by adding machinery manufactured here at the yard. Expansion of the facilities to include a coppersmith shop and a room for inspecting projectiles was recommended at that time. Furthermore, the smithery had been increased and the building enlarged, mainly to house the new steam hammer. The ability of this steam hammer to flatten a mass of molten iron or simply to crack an egg was a matter of intriguing curiosity to plant visitors. The gun carriage and block shops were finished and in operation by November '63, as were 2 coke ovens. Manufacture of ammunition was continued successfully, as well as anchors and torpedoes that were manufactured here. A lot of stuff was made at this place. A unique achievement is reported to have been made by one of the Norfolk men, Thomas Dwyer by name, who invented a machine for turning a perfect sphere, a process applicable to make cannonballs or shells. The invention was credited with being the first of its kind, and the Charlotte Naval Yard was the site of its first use in the United States, the entire country. That was later confiscated. That invention was confiscated by the federal government at the close of the war, and obviously with no compensation to the inventor. Under superintendency of Chief Engineer Ramsey, the Charlotte Yard increased in importance in the Navy establishment. By the fall of '64, it was officially recognized as the only naval ordnance works in the Confederate States at which heavy forging could be done. The work done successfully included forging and finishing of propeller shafting for the steamers and also wrought iron projectiles. Ramsey later recalled the Charlotte Yard forged the propeller shafts for the Virginia II, which was used in the James River, the Albemarle, which was used in eastern North Carolina and attacked the fleet in '64, gunboats built in Charleston and Savannah. Ironclads were also built in Wilmington that the shafts went to, including the Confederate steamer Raleigh, which went out to attack the Federal fleet in May of '64 off Fort Fisher. Some 300 men of the yard were organized into a battalion of 3 companies of local defense troops. Ramsey, chief engineer of the yard, acted as major and commanding officer of this battalion. Although these men are reported to have been called away from their workbenches occasionally to repel raiding parties of the enemy, of course we all know there weren't many raids in our area until very late in the war. Their most colorful military service was helping to guard the Confederate treasury in this escape in April '65 further south. When the Confederate specie train reached Charlotte, it was accompanied by a corps of midshipmen under command of Captain W.H. Parker. When the decision was made to attempt to transport the specie to the Trans-Mississippi Department, one company of Charlotte Navy Yard workmen, about 60 men, under a Captain Tabb, volunteered to escort the train, while 2 other companies remained to garrison facilities in Charlotte. Although the captain later lost his roll of members, it was remembered by others that the company was composed of about 10 men from Charlotte, 45 from Portsmouth, and 5 from Washington. Mrs. Davis and her children also accompanied this specie train further south. After the war, Captain Parker remembered Captain Tabb's company of uniformed men from the Navy Yard, who volunteered to accompany the specie train and remain with him to the end. Captain Parker was complimentary in his comments of the company, saying, quote, "A better set of men I never served with. During the entire march, I found them cheerful and ready for any duty. They left me finally at Abbeville, South Carolina, after all was over, and I have a distinct recollection of their marching off in gallant array with field music playing Dixie on their return to Charlotte." By the time President Davis and his cabinet came through Charlotte, during the week of April 20th, work at the Navy Yard had ceased. The buildings remained in use for years as part of the Mecklenburg Iron Works. Matter of fact, some of the old manhole covers around town that you can occasionally see still have on them Mecklenburg Iron Works, Charlotte. Later they were used as office and warehouse facilities of the Seaboard Airline Railway, and I remember seeing some of those buildings in the 1950s along East Trade and College. I recall when they were torn down in 1959, when I was 13, the Navy Yard shield that is affixed to this new memorial may not be located in the spot where the Ordnance Works once stood, but this monument tells the story of the yard in far more detail than just the Navy shield itself ever could. For people in our area who want to know anything about our Confederate history, and I quote my good buddy Brian O'Neill over here, if you come to Elmwood Cemetery, you will find out something about the Confederate history of Mecklenburg County. And You are standing on hallowed ground, consecrated with the ashes of our gallant Confederate dead. God bless the memory of the men who worked diligently for Southern independence at the Confederate Navy Yard in Charlotte. God bless the memory of the men who fought, bled, and died for the Southern Cross and lie buried in this sacred soil, hallowed by righteousness of their cause and the valor and gallantry with which they fought against overwhelming odds. And God bless Dixie, our native land. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I have a letter from the state president of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. She was not, but a very important part. You are upholding our Southern heritage and honoring our Confederates who fought hard and gave up much for our Southland. I wish I could be there with you today, but I know I am with you in spirit. I know you will have a meaningful and beautiful service. Thank you all for being the true daughters making a difference by working together to honor our Confederate ancestors. Sincerely, Patricia H. Gasson, NC Division President, United Daughters of the Confederacy. That which is held in memory still endures and is real. We are grateful for the records of the past, which bring inspiration and courage. We are appreciative of the lessons taught by memorials to events and deeds of long ago. We pray that our lives may always be patterned to give such devotion and service as did our forefathers of this great Southland. We, the members of the Stonewall Jackson 220 United Daughters of the Confederacy, now rededicate this Confederate Navy Yard shield, which recognizes the contributions of the men who served at the Confederate States Naval Ordnance Works in Charlotte from 1862 to 1865. Miss Violet Alexander, a member of Stonewall Jackson 220 in 1910 and chair of the committee originally given the task of marking the site of the Confederate Navy Yard, said in an article that she wrote about the dedication of this shield, "It is frequently visited by strangers in our city, preserving history and instructing our youth and visitors in the remarkable fact, which is strangely unique, that our inland Queen City had a Navy Yard from 1862 to 1865. With the placement of the Navy Yard shield at this monument in the Confederate section of Elmwood Cemetery, her words are once again, and long at last, true. May this monument be blessed. May it remind all who pause not only of the noble deeds of the Confederate heroes who served at the Confederate Navy Yard, but also of the continuing need for unselfish service. From this moment of rededication, we trust there may come inspiration for broader vision and finer service. Let us pray. We are grateful, dear Lord, for our forebears who bequeathed to us a glorious heritage. Keep ever in our minds and hearts a spirit of fervent gratitude. May we rededicate our lives to a fulfillment of service for Thee, and may the blessings of God rest and abide here forever. Amen. Not for fame or fortune, not for place or rank, not lured by ambition or goaded by necessity, but in simple obedience to duty as they understood it, these men suffered all, sacrificed all, dared all, and died. This rededication today could not have happened without the assistance of several individuals and groups. I would like to thank Bill Anderson, and I think Bill is here. Bill, raise your hand. I would like to thank Bill Anderson, who told me about the shield and where it was being stored, and had the desire to keep this piece of Charlotte history alive. I would like to thank Les Epperson of the City of Charlotte for rescuing the shield when the old convention center was torn down, and for having it restored, and for safely storing it and lovingly caring for it for several years. I would like to thank Jim Keenan, also of the City of Charlotte, and Les Epperson again for meeting with several of us almost 2 years ago to show us the shield and for helping us to begin thinking through possible locations to relocate the shield. I would like to thank Quinn Paul of the City of Charlotte, who was appointed as the project manager for the relocation of the shield. Quinn took care of all the necessary paperwork to get the shield out of storage and once again on public display. I would like to thank Dan Morrill and Stuart Gray of the Historic Landmarks Commission for getting the approval of the commission to move the shield to Elmwood Cemetery. I would like to thank John Ellis and Larry Walker for suggesting Elmwood Cemetery to us in the first place. I'd also like to thank them for giving advice, assistance, and moral support to make this monument happen. I would like to thank Larry Walker also for writing the text that you will see on the monument in just a few moments, and it is printed on the back of your program. I'd like to thank David Erdman, a local attorney and sort of a amateur historian who collects pictures of old Charlotte. He sent me a picture of one of the original Navy Yard buildings that you can see the shield prominently displayed upon. That picture, I have a copy of it here today if any of you would like to see it. That picture is in the process of being etched into metal, and it will be placed on the back of the monument. And I do have it, so please do come up and take a look at it. I would like to thank Randy Sewell of Long's Monument Company for putting a rush on this project and getting this remarkable monument finished in record time. Our heartfelt thanks is also extended to the 13th North Carolina Troops, the 30th North Carolina Troops, Latham's Battery, Charlotte Metrolina Civil War Roundtable, Robert E. Lee Confederate Heritage Association, Stonewall Jackson 220, and several individuals for your financial support and for your participation in today's event. Finally, thanks to all of our reenactors for being here today, and to each of you for being a very important part of this historic event. At the conclusion of today's program, you will be able to get a closer look at the monument. The blank space on the back here at the top is where the etching of the picture will be placed, and hopefully in just a few weeks. So please do plan another trip out to Elmwood so that you can see it after it is totally completed. We have just a few more things on our program. Our Confederate monument, which by the way does need some work on its own. If any of you would ever like to contribute to any of our projects, just see any of the members.
The third wreath will be placed by Cliff Grimsley on behalf of the Colonel Francis Marion Parker Civilian Alliance. Thank you to those placing wreaths. As it states on the obelisk behind me, we remember, we honor them.
North Carolina Battalion.
Squad, shoulder, arm. Ready. At the right oblique. Aim.
right oblique. Aim! Right oblique. Aim!